Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to Midrash U for January 7th of 2023. It is the 14th of Tevet. I don't have that up on the screen, for the year 5783, as the Jews account to the calendar. I am Messianic teacher, Elder Rusty Simpson, and we have been in looking at issues having to do with the Maccabean revolt. And actually, we've spent a lot of time kind of building up to that, some time looking at Hanukkah and how that has been understood. Last week we did a lot of the preparatory work to lead us into that time frame of the Maccabean revolt. And some of the things that we have talked about have included this concept of near and far prophecies. Prophecies that are fulfilled in a short term, in a partial fulfillment, and then fulfilled in a long term in a full fulfillment. We can look at many things having to do with the appointments of God as being specific to that. Our Christian brothers and sisters would tell you, well, we don't have to worry about the Passover anymore because when Christ came, he fulfilled that. There was an initial fulfillment, there was Christ coming, and now all the appointments are done. We don't have to worry about them. But the reality is that they're not all done, and that there are additional fulfillments of things that have to occur, particularly with the appointments. And we look forward to those, and we recognize that things like the millennial reign, things like the second coming of Christ, which we'll be talking about today in the Shabbat message as well, all of these things have their future fulfillment, but they also had a prior partial fulfillment that we're going to look at today. So we talked about how all of this goes back and points to the book of Daniel and to the book of Revelation, how these things are connected, how the foretelling of the Antichrist to come, and how Antiochus IV Epiphanes is going to be a type and a shadow of the Antichrist to come. We talked about how it was Alexander the Great, and how he, in a vision, is told by this guy that he's never seen before, representing a god he's never heard of. And he's told that he should get up from where he's at in Macedonia. He's secured the country of Macedonia after his father was murdered. And he's told to cross the sea and to take possession of the lands that God has provided to him. And we know that empire is going to be one of the largest empires of the time. We talked about how at the siege of Tyre, and this is along the Mediterranean coast, how Alexander the Great was securing his backside, securing with the navies and with forces all of the people who could come against him and cut his supply lines. And before he would proceed further to the east, he had to secure all those areas. Well, the siege of Tyre was an island nation, had very formidable walls. Nobody had been able to conquer it. And what he did was to build basically a jetty that allowed him and his troops to fight from hard ground. And he filled in the sea between him and the island city of Tyre. Well, while he was doing that, he sent to the people at Jerusalem, and he said to them, look, here's your opportunity. You can join my side because I'm going to take the land. And if you do that and supply me with food and the resources that I need, plus men to fight with, then everything will be good. You'll be a friend of Alexander the Great. And if you don't, then things are not going to go well. Well, not only does the high priest of Jerusalem say, no, sorry, can't do that, but he says, no, sorry, can't do that because we have already made a promise to the Seleucids, whom you are fighting, and we cannot go back on that promise. Well, that enraged Alexander the Great, and he was ready to destroy the city. He had already given orders after he secured the city coast of the Mediterranean. He had already given orders that Jerusalem was to be sacked, that the women, the children, the possessions, everything was going to be put to the fire and plundered. And he had given orders to his men that they had free hand to do anything and everything that they wanted in the sacking of Jerusalem. And he was proceeding along the road to Jerusalem at the front of his army, when what he sees is this man and this procession of people following him. Well, he had sent word saying, okay, you chose your side, you need to know I'm coming, and this is what I'm going to do. And the whole of the city of Jerusalem was in turmoil. And in the midst of that, you had the high priest who has a dream. And in the dream, God tells him to put on his vestments for his high priest office, including the mitre and the hat, and to lead the priests out of the city, to open all the gates, to put out banners as a celebration, and to march out unarmed to go meet this army that was now coming to destroy them. And as the two sides came to where they could see each other, Alexander the Great calls a halt to his army, gets off of his horse, walks to the high priest who's leading the procession, and bows down to, not the high priest, he will tell us later, but to the God that this high priest represents. Because the dream that he had in Macedonia was the very high priest who stood before him now, and the very God who had told him, come across the sea, the lands are yours for the taking, and I have given them into your hand. And so, rather than sack Jerusalem, he provides Jerusalem with special favor. And of course, he's brought into the city, and he is shown the book of Daniel, and shown where all of the history leading up to his conquest of Macedonia and then of the known world was already written in the book of Daniel. And so he sees the Jews as a very special people, and he provides them with a place that nobody else in his kingdom had. He supplied for the sacrifices at the temple out of his own pocket. He asked for troops and received troops now that the Seleucids had been defeated and were on the run. And Jerusalem had literally been taken not by force, but by the very nature that God had given it into their hands. And he supplies troops who will go on to do some really miraculous things. And he gives Jerusalem a very special place. All right. So we talked about how he would go on to conquer lands all the way across. We're talking about the lands today of Syria, of Iraq, of Iran, of India, of Afghanistan, and all the stands. He literally conquered all of these territories and subjugated them under him. But as a young man, he's going to die before he can return home to Macedonia. And in the process, he takes the lands that he has conquered and he divides them up into 4 unequal pieces. And he breaks them into these 4 horns that we're told about in the book of Daniel. And Lysimachus has the area of Greece. Cassandra has the area of Macedonia itself. Ptolemy has Egypt, and Egypt is the breadbasket of the world at that point. They depended upon the excess food that could be produced by Egypt to supply the abilities to have armies that could travel and to go do other things. And then you had Seleucus, who is given all of the areas of Iran, Iraq, and parts of Syria, and all the way eastward into India. Huge amounts of land. We're told in the book of Daniel that there's a little horn that grows out of one of the other horns and grows exceedingly great. And that is going to be Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He was born in 215 BC to Antiochus III the Great and his wife Laodiceas the third. His name at birth was Mithridates, which means gift of Mithra, right? He was named after the father of Laodice, who was King Mithridates of Pontus. And he assumes the name of Antiochus, which means stubborn or resistant, when he ascends the throne in 175 BC. He has a brother who is older, who is Seleucid IV, who inherits the kingdom. Well, we talked about leading up to this whole issue is the fact that these four different kingdoms that are set apart to each of these generals, their lines continue their rule. And everybody wants to be like Alexander the Great. They all want to have all the territory. And so there is always a lot of fighting between them. And what we see is that there arises in the West the city-state of Rome, who is still coming to power. In North Africa, you have the Carthaginians. You have these other four kingdoms that are the powerhouses of the time. And Ptolemy IV, who's the guy who sets in motion the writing of the Septuagint. Remember, that's going to take more than 100 years to accomplish, taking the writings of the Jews and translating them into the Greek. The Greek Septuagint Bible is the one that we have that represents the Old Testament. And it's going to date to just after the time of the Maccabean revolt. Well, he's in power. You have Egypt is the breadbasket of the world, and you have Antiochus III the Great, known as the Great because the Seleucid Empire had lost much of its territory. Pretty much they were constrained back to just the area of Babylon and a little bit more eastward. And what he did was he reconquered all the areas that Alexander the Great had conquered that had been given to him originally, including all the way over into India, which is where he will get his battle elephants and the troops that go with them.
So he's the son of Seleucus?
Yeah, so Antiochus the third is in the line of the Seleucids. The Seleucids have a long line that rules, including Antiochus IV Epiphanes. They're all in the line of the Seleucids. Okay, and so he turns his attention towards trying to, again, be like Alexander the Great. He has his two sons. He has a daughter. He has he goes through the process of capturing the territory of Eastern Mediterranean, which includes the Sinai Peninsula, but doesn't go into Egypt directly. He then sets his eyes on the Lysimachus Empire, representing Macedonia, and then also into the area of the Greek, which is ruled by the Cassandres. So Rome is making all these treaties at this time. And those treaties don't seem to have a whole lot of teeth to them. They say, okay, if we get attacked, you can come to our aid. If we get attacked, we'll come to your aid. Kind of like NATO. Only there are no troops stationed in Egypt or in any of these other places. You have Cleopatra I of Syria, Antiochus III's daughter, who he thinks, oh great, I'm going to marry her to the Ptolemy line and then I'll gain control of Egypt and I won't actually have to go fight there. Problem is that she says, yeah, Dad, I don't think so. I think we're just going to do things on our own. Well, he moves in to take Macedonia and then moves further to start working at at the area of Greece itself. And in the process, you have this alignment between the two other major Western Mediterranean forces, the Romans and the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians align with Antiochus III under Hannibal the Great, and the Romans come in with a force that is a third of the size of the forces that Antiochus III the Great has. And conventional wisdom says that you have to have those numbers flipped. If you're going to take territory, you need at least 3-1. And if you're going to lay siege to a city, which all of these were, you need more like 5-1. So the Romans were greatly outmatched. The Carthaginians think, oh boy, here's my chance to take out the Romans once and for all, and we can just take over all of those territory and all the sea lanes. But what happens is that the Romans, with a much smaller force, beat back Antiochus III, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And they forced them back into the area of the Middle East directly. And the Carthaginians, Hannibal the Great is killed, and the Carthaginians will never be a power again. Well, Antiochus redoubles his forces, brings in more people, and goes up against the Romans that 3rd time and loses, and has to enter into a peace treaty with the Romans. And by that, one of his heirs is going to be kept in Rome. That ends up being Mithridates, who's going to be Antiochus IV. He was the youngest son. The Seleucid Empire was forced to pay an indemnity. They were forced to pay a yearly fee. And that's how the Romans kept people in check. Right? If you were busy having to try to gain these funds, then you didn't have time to actually plot against Rome. And so Antiochus III starts going back to all these places he conquered and raiding the temples there that he had left untouched. So he had left the wealth in the places that he had founded. That was one of the ways in which the Seleucid Empire was successful at bringing people to their side, is that they didn't take their wealth, but they required their men to serve in the army. Well, in Susa, he successfully raids the temple to gain the gold of the temple. However, he's killed in that battle. And now that brings his son to the empire. And of course, the brother to Seleucid IV is not going to be as useful to the Romans as one of Seleucus IV's own heirs. And so at that point, we have one of the children of Seleucid IV being sent, the youngest son, sent into Rome, and Antiochus IV is brought back into the area. And of course, there is going to be more subterfuge. That's the timeline that you're looking at the top, that underneath the blue bar. The Septuagint is completed about 132 BC. It started somewhere between 246 and 248 BC. We're not sure exactly when, but somewhere in that range. And those writings are translated, but it started under Ptolemy II. And so Antiochus III dies. His son comes to power. He's going to rule for just over 12 years. And then he's going to be killed off. And his son is going to take power. We talked about the expulsion of Heliodorus, and about how Onias III was the high priest and he was really good, but because now the Seleucid Empire is trying to have to come up with monies to pay the Romans, they're raiding all the temples. And Heliodorus is told by Jason, who wants to rule over the temple, that there's all this gold just waiting for you to take from the temple. And so Heliodorus comes down to actually confiscate that. And in a story that we're told where the army is led into the city, and Heliodorus the following day goes into the temple with his armed guards, and there appears this person arrayed in gold, and these 2 other guys arrayed in gold who start to just beat and pummel. Just appears out of nowhere on the temple grounds. And the pummeling by the horse, Heliodorus is knocked down. His troops say, that's just bizarre. It wasn't there, it's there, we're out of here. And he is near death. And the high priest prays for him to recover. And the same angels that had come and beaten him appear to him a second time and say, don't think this is because of you. It's because Onias prayed for you that we are are acquiescing to his prayers and giving you back your life. And they returned him back to health. Of course, he goes home and tells the ruler of the Seleucid Empire that can't get the money. And he's like, well, who do I send? And he says, well, if you're going to send anybody, send somebody you really don't like and you want to die, because that's what's going to happen to him. So that's the story of Heliodorus. Heliodorus is going to rise up and kill Seleucid IV and supplant him. And that's when Antiochus IV Epiphanes, Seleucid's brother, is going to step in, because a child king is placed on the throne from Seleucid IV, and the good old uncle is going to make sure that the child is well taken care of, and we mean that in the sense of killing him, which he does. All right, so that kind of sets the stage. Antiochus then has taken the throne. He's setting about to quell the various issues that he has. He's not a nice guy. He's just not well thought of. He basically is a guy who says, you pay me money and you can get what you want. And it doesn't even have to be money. It can be a promissory note. And so you have all of a sudden the Temple Mount being, and the control of the Temple Mount and the leadership of Israel being vested not in the high priest who is in the line of Aaron, but in whoever will supply a promissory note for the largest amount to Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Okay, and so the real high priest gets supplanted. That creates great turmoil. It creates riots. Things are just really getting out of hand. And in the midst of all that, and here again is our timeline. We'll go back there. So Antiochus IV is now taking reign. He's going to reign from 175 to 164 BC. Okay. So in the midst of all that, he is looking to quell the areas. Everybody has wanted Egypt because Egypt is the breadbasket of the world. That's where the majority of the food is. If you control the food supply, then you can control what everybody gets and what everybody does. We see that today as well. And it's from there that we have this story that is always called a line in a sand, right? And you've heard this. I'm going to draw a line in the sand. You better not cross that line, or if you cross that line, there's going to be trouble. That's how we typically understand it, but the story is different than that. It's actually not a line in the sand. It is a circle in the sand. So Antiochus IV Epiphanes has conquered all of Egypt. There remains one city, Alexandria, that he still has to conquer. And the troops are all gone because he's defeated them in battle. He's taken everything from the lower parts of the Nile all the way up, and he is marching his troops basically to ceremonially take the city. Problem is, remember the Romans? Remember those treaties that they entered into? Well, they entered into a treaty with the Egyptians, with the Ptolemy regime. And they showed up, but they didn't show up with troops. What occurs in this, and we're told about this in the book of 2nd Maccabees, what occurs in this, and of course he takes all of the area of Judea. He takes the Sinai Peninsula. He then takes all of Egypt. This is Antiochus IV. And the Romans send an envoy. They've got this treaty that says, we'll send you troops. But what they sent was not troops, but this guy who is named Gaius Popilius Laenas. And he's an 80-year-old diplomat who walks with a cane slowly. And with him are sent 24 guys, not soldiers, but guys in tunics carrying fascias. The fascias are these bundles of sticks that are tied together, and in the fascia is an axe head. And that represents the 24 legions of Rome. They didn't send the legions, didn't feel like they had to. And so what transpires, and this is an old mercury dime, that's a picture of the fascia, that's what it would have looked like. And we have those on either side in the House of Representatives, right? Because they represent power and the fact that we are stronger together than we are separate, right? So what you end up having happen is that out of Alexandria, these 24 guys with Gaius Leonius in front of them by about 50 feet, walking alone, and he walks up to the army, and the army comes to a halt, and he says, I need to talk to Antiochus Epiphanes. And they're like, well, he's at the back. Go get him. And the army's like, well, what the heck is this? You know, there's these 24 guys with the fascias. So Antiochus comes up, and Leonius tells him that Rome is here in presence, and it is to you to withdraw out of Egypt and to quit claim on Egypt for now and forever. You will never ever again invade. You will never ever again claim to have any piece of Egypt. And Antiochus IV is thinking, oh yeah, these folks kicked the tail of my dad with like a third of the army that and then a fifth of the army that we put into the field. And he's like, well, I need time to go talk to my advisors, my military advisors. And this old man shoves the tip of his staff into the ground and proceeds to walk a circle around Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And he says, before you leave this circle, I will have your answer. And you will either be at war with Rome, or you will comply with what we are telling you to do. That's tough. That is a line in the sand. So Antiochus IV says, okay, don't think I want to take that risk. And he says, okay, we will do that. And he's given I think it's 2 weeks to remove his troops out of Egypt and to get all of his garrisons and everything that he's placed. They all got to go, right? Well, the word spreads, as words always do. They never spread accurately, that Antiochus IV has died, and that you know, everybody's kind of free of him. Well, with all the turmoil that has been in Jerusalem, Jerusalem is now rising up to throw off the troops of Antiochus IV that are stationed there, right? And riots are ensuing, people are getting killed, property is getting destroyed, things are not good, and you can just imagine how the position that Antiochus IV is in. In front of his entire army, he just had to roll over and show his belly. Not a good deal when you have armies and people that have desires to usurp. And now all of Judea is in revolt, or at least Jerusalem is. Well, he is just not in a good mood, to say the least. And it's from there that he heads back to Jerusalem. We've talked about lines in the sand. When I first put this together back during the Obama administration, he was drawing lines for the Iraqis. Saddam, you can't do this. Saddam, you can't do this. And every time he crossed them, he created a new line. But again, it's a circle in the sand. We talked about the high priest having gone to Menelaus. Jason wants it. He's going to get it because he gives an even larger promissory note to Antiochus IV than what Menelaus had given. And it's into this turmoil that Antiochus is forced to re-enter Judea, and Jerusalem is in an uproar. And he's just like not having any of it. And so he gives the orders for Jerusalem to be sacked. They literally go through and are going to kill the citizens and take them prisoner. Second Maccabees chapter 5 tells us that preceding this, for nearly 40 days, the people of Jerusalem saw visions of cavalry troops in golden armor charging across the sky. Think back to the issues with Heliodorus, right? These guys clad in gold, right? And now they're seeing them above them, and they're going back and forth, and they're setting up battle lines, and they're shooting arrows at each other, and it's just all this calamity. And the shields are clashing, and people are like, boy, we sure hope this is a good sign. But it wasn't. And so Antiochus IV comes to Jerusalem, and he proceeds to unleash his troops to do the worst. And he comes into the temple, and he desecrates the temple. Okay, he does this and sets up a statue. He's tired of dealing with the revolts. There had been a number of different revolts leading up to this, all having to do with the fact that the corrupt leaders that he had put into place were now causing so much turmoil amongst the people, like when the golden vessels that are used in the holy place are being stolen and taken to pay part of the ransom to Antiochus IV, right? The people go nuts, and rightly so. And so, in the midst of all this, he is going to come up with a final solution for the Jews, because he's tired of dealing with them. And so he decides that from this point on forward, that the Jews could not keep their Sabbath, they could not keep their Moedim, they could not keep their calendar, right? And if you don't know what day it is, how do you know when to celebrate the Passover, right? The goal here is to remove from them their cultural identity, force them to become Greek, in order to make them disappear as a people. And so he sets up a statue of Zeus that actually has his face where Zeus's face would have been in the Holy of Holies, and he is requiring the people of Jerusalem to swear allegiance to him and to sacrifice to his gods and to eat the things that they are prohibited from eating, the pig's flesh and such. Yeah, it just is not a good time. And the problem is that in the midst of all this, in the midst of all the Hellenization, there are people who say, hoo, yeah, we're glad. We are happy to do this. And part of the Jews said, yeah, we want to be like the Greeks. The Greeks had all the culture, right? They had the cool clothes. They had all kinds of things that they did. A gymnasium was set up right below the Temple Mount, and when the games were called to begin, the priests would strip off their robes, strip down naked, which is how you had to compete in the games, and go down to the games to compete, leaving their service unto the Lord in order to participate in these games. It was terrible. Well, in the midst of all this, right, it's not just that Antiochus is saying you can't do these things. He's saying if you do the things that are of the Jews, we are going to kill you. If you circumcise your child, we're going to, and I'll try to make this not as nasty as it is, but they're going to gut them and hang that child around your neck and parade you about the city because you circumcised a male child. They're going to force you to eat pork, because pork was one of the primary animals that was grown both to sacrifice to the Greek gods, but as also to provide food for the people. And They're not going to, again, let you keep the Sabbath. They're not going to let you keep the Rosh Chodeshim, so you don't know when the months start, so that you don't know where it is that you are in time, when the Pesach will be. Yes, ma'am. Oh, you might need to turn that on. See if the light's there. It's on top. Yep, button. Okay,
Hello.
there we go.
So assuming that God only allows this kind of tragedy to overcome his people when they are in rebellion and disobedience to him, is this like because there was a portion of the Jews that were embracing the Hellenization, and that's why God allowed this?
Yeah, and so, and we talked about this before when we talked about Hanukkah. Let me see if I've got the slide that I'm looking for, which I don't think I do. Remember that I talked about how you had two sets of groups. So let's do this. Let me pop out of this and pull up.
It's just so hard for me to fathom God allowing that level of tragedy to come.
It ends up being such that the people always want to suppress, and it's not just the Jews. We have to keep in mind that. Let me bring it up here. Let's see. This is it. All right. So you had this split between the city dwellers, and remember that at this time frame that the vast majority of people lived in cities, right? And the city-states were the way that everything was done. That's where the power was controlled. And the people who embraced the Greeks embraced Hellenism and were humanistic in how they viewed things. Well, Alexander the Great had been tutored by not by Plato, but Aristotle. Plato's personally, not just in a school, but personally tutored by Aristotle. In this move towards science, this move towards understanding the world, and also in the Greek philosophies, everything from Stoicism to kind of a rationalism that had occurred. All of these things were seen to be the obvious way that things worked. Well, the Jews hadn't seen their God for quite a while, and miracles notwithstanding, even like the miracle that occurs with Heliodorus, or the fact that they're seeing this array of battles that is in turmoil over above them, none of that stuff seems to make a whole lot of difference. And so you have the upper class and the city dwellers. The upper class were merchants for the most part. They could purchase the right to be a citizen in the Greek Empire, in the Seleucid Empire. Not a trivial thing. Gave you specific rights that you didn't have as just a Judean. Well, in the outer areas, in the rural areas, you had the lower class peoples. And these were people that were considered to be pious, right? Because they kept that which the law said to do. They kept the kosher laws, they kept the calendar with the Rosh Chodeshim, the beginnings of each month, so that they knew when the appointments of God, when they were required to be in certain places. You had synagogues, you had the Septuagint, which was the book from which they all read. Greek, right? But it's a Greek translation of the Old Testament. And it was from that they were reading. And the Pharisees were these folks that were the rural folks, right? And the Pharisees controlled the synagogues and the rural areas. And you have literally this dichotomy between those that say it's evil in our eyes to serve the Lord, and those that say we will serve the Lord and we will do that which he has asked us to do, right? Much as it is today. And oftentimes, people don't really truly realize and understand where the battle lines are drawn. And we'll be talking a little bit about that today in the service. All right. So, yeah, absolutely. And this is a key piece to this too, because as we have, let me bring this back up. As we have this terrible set of circumstances that occurs, you literally have this civil war between the people of Judea, right? And today we think less of the Maccabean revolt as in a Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid Empire, and it's being repainted by predominantly the secular Jews, but also even amongst the scholar of the Hasidic type Jews as a internal civil war that's occurring between them. And the problem then becomes that the Jewish thought process over the years has come to a place to where the Maccabeans are not seen as heroes anymore, but they're seen as villains because they were going up against their brothers and going up against that which the people wanted to do.
Also, they're saying that it's like another form of faceless hatred.
Yes, and these zealots, these fundamentalists, these people who wanted to keep the ways of God, how dare they do so, one, and two, say that not only should we do so, but you should do so. All right? I would put that idea, that concept as a small, but you're seeing it also in their papers as well. It's more on the scholarly end, and the scholarly end is always more secular than not. And the secular end of it, absolutely positively. If you look over the last 5 to 7 Hanukkahs, you see this growing trend towards well, we're going to do the lights thing because it's kind of fun to have a Christmas light. But we don't buy into any of that. Those Maccabeans were not good people.
So, where did the Sadducees, the writers in this whole episode?
So the Sadducees are the Hasmoneans. They are the Maccabeans. Yeah. We'll get to that. But that's going to be your two fractions that come up and show up in the time of Yeshua, is the Hasmoneans who wrest power from the Seleucids and control their own empire for some period of time. They are the Maccabeans. So they're going to be the ruling people, and of course they're going to just get corrupted like there's no tomorrow. All right, so back into the story. So Antiochus IV has got his final solution to the Jewish question, which is to try to make them go away as a people, which seems to be the repeat efforts, be it the pogroms of Eastern Europe and Russia or the Nazi Holocaust. It just seems to be the way that all of these things go. We just need to make these people go away, and wouldn't things be so much better if we do? All right, so in the midst of this, you have a couple of different things that occur. And one of those that occurs is that one of the priests, who is actually a priest who is really, really well thought of in the community, both by those that are Hellenistic and those that are not, he's retired. He's 80 years old. And they come to him and they're like, okay, we need you to publicly go up here, bow to the statue, and eat some pork. And he's like, not doing it. And they're like, okay, well, just come in proximity of this statue and eat some pork. Not doing it. Okay, well, just come in proximity in front of the people and pretend to eat a piece of the pork. We like you a lot. We don't want to have to kill you. And his response is, and his name is Eleazar, his response is that not doing this, that to lead the younger people astray by throwing away a lifetime of devotion to our Lord in this time frame is the worst thing that I could do, and I'm not going to do it. You're just going to have to kill me. So they do, and nobody's happy about it. But this process continues, and it starts in Jerusalem. And what happens is that the people who were priests who were not Hellenized, who were not looking to do that which the Seleucids wanted them to do, flee from Jerusalem, right? Because sacrifices have been shut down. If you're seen worshiping on the Sabbath, you're going to get killed, right? If you're seen eating non-kosher or kosher, you're going to get killed. So these folks leave, and one of the people who leaves is the head of the Maccabean family, the Hasmonean family. Maccabee means hammer. Judas Maccabee is Judas the hammer, because he is deemed to be this hammer that's going to break the chains of the Seleucids. All right, I'm kind of giving you synopsis here on things. Here is the martyrdom of Eleazar. They just do some terrible things to him. You can read about this again in the Second Maccabees is a good book to read. First Maccabees, Second and Third Maccabees are the two good ones. No, I'm sorry, First and Second Maccabees. Yes, ma'am. It was people aligned with the Seleucids, so maybe it was their troops. You see over and over again how people want to show that they're on the right side, so they'll go in and do crazy things. There's some horrible stories that come out of Russia having to do with communism, and I'm not going to. I'd like to digress, but I'm not going to. That's another area of interest to me. So we have the martyrdom of Eleazar that's recorded there. We also have the martyrdom of Hannah and her 7 sons. Okay, so both of these stories, the key points of this is that what's being contrasted are how the world is trying to stamp out the Jews and to make them be no more as a people, and how those that are pious are standing up and saying, not having it, not doing it, you're not going to make me, it doesn't matter what you do to me. And Hannah and her sons are going to get martyred, starting at the oldest son, all the way down to the youngest son, and then finally Hannah herself. And there's some very interesting things that come out of this. We talked about how in the Septuagint that there are quotes that, and the complaint for these books that were apocryphal books like the Maccabees, the complaints were, well, they don't have any relevance to the Bible. Right? And so we don't think they should be included. And some churches do, some churches don't. Right? But you have within these stories here a common theme of, one, the same sort of concept as you see in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they are required to bow down to the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. Right? And they're like, not doing it. We're not going to do it. And we understand you're going to put us to death. Okay, we serve a God who can intervene to save us, or who can raise us from the dead. But even if he doesn't intervene, we will not bow down. Right? That's the statement that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego make. Doesn't matter what you do, we know who we serve, and we are not having any part of this. Well, the same sorts of statements are being made by Hannah and her 7 sons. And Hannah is just spurring them on to no matter what. And the descriptions in here get really horrid as to what they did to these people. All right? And I won't go into the details of that. I'll let you read it. But one of the statements that gets made in the midst of all this is a statement from Hannah where she basically says, we know why this is happening to us. Right? They're the ones being martyred. They're the ones doing the right thing. And her response is that the reason that these things have fallen upon us is because the Jewish people as a whole have rejected their God. And it's the pious ones, it's the ones that are the people of God, that when the Antichrist, when the adversary turns his attention in wrath, are going to be under that wrath, right? This is a picture of where things are going to be Not when God pours out his wrath. He will not pour it out on his people, but when the Antichrist pours out his wrath. Okay? And people conflate these and confuse them all the time. But when the souls are being martyred, that we see in the book of Revelation, and Christ who speaks of it elsewhere, he's not talking about the wrath of God onto these people. It was not God who was putting these people to death. It was the type and shadow of the Antichrist. It was the adversary. Right? And again, we just need to sit with that, because if you think that you know what, I'm a child of the Most High God, and therefore I'm good, and I'm not going to have these issues, and I'm not going to have these problems. Well, all the way back to the Exodus, in the 50 days that takes us from the crossing of the Red Sea, the 50 days that represents the time between Yeshua HaMashiach rising from the dead and the giving of the Holy Spirit, the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. Inside those 50 days, you got some very specific pieces of information to us. One, you have to depend on the manna. The manna is the Word of God. Yeshua HaMashiach himself is that manna, and it is the living Torah, right? The Word of God has been given to us, and the manna was given so that we knew that the words weren't just for our brains, but they were for our life. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Okay? You have the living water. And we're told that those living waters, which also supplied life, representing the Holy Spirit, would also be in us and would well up out of us into others. Okay? You had the concept of government being installed, because the time frames that are being talked about are such that we have to be organized. And that's what government is supposed to do, is to organize the people. Not oppress them, but to organize them to bring about the works of God the Father. Right? All of us who have been called, that's why we were called. We weren't called to stand on the far side of the Red Sea, milling about, wondering, well, we got to the cross, that's our finish line. I got my salvation. No. You were saved unto good works. And unless we are about the works of God the Father, which we'll talk about again in the sermon today, you're not part of the kingdom. That's hard. Book of 2 Peter makes that very clear. And we're going to be looking at that later. But the other thing that occurs in there is that after God has literally removed the breath of the firstborn of man and beast, in an instant, they're dead. And the people have been removed out of Egypt, and the armies of Egypt have been literally killed off when the waters come back over. And everybody on the far side of the Red Sea knows about this. But the Amalekites, they said, don't care. We're going after those people. And they attack the Israelites inside of that 50 days, knowing full well what has occurred. And they will further call on Balaam to try to figure out a way to curse the people. Right? Balaam comes a little bit further out of the 50 days, but when they are not successful in fighting them directly inside the 50 days, like literally right before the giving of the law, chapter 17 and 18. And then chapter 19, they now are at Mount Sinai. Okay? And they're told at Mount Sinai exactly what is required of them. If in shmawing you will shmaw unto the voice of Adonai your God, that's what he asks of us. We need to be able to hear his voice, to listen intently with understanding, and then to give a considered response to say either, Lord, talk to the hand today, ain't doing that, or Lord, your will be done. That's what he requires. And then he gives us what we call the law, But Torah actually means instructions, right? And we call it the law because it makes it a lot harder for people to violate the law than it does to violate the instructions, right? And there's a mindset there of control that creeps in even from the very beginning. So this idea that the target has been on the backs of Israel from the time frame that they have left Egypt and will continue to be on our backs. And we may have times where things are quiet, but more often than not, we will have times when things are not quiet. Look at that first 300 years. It takes almost 300 years from the time frame of Christ before we get to a place to where Christianity is no longer having martyrs on a weekly basis. 3 centuries, 300 years, right? It's with Charlemagne that changes in the 343s, and that starts a whole nother set of issues. What comes from this is the idea that when we do not do that which God has called us to do, we are opening ourselves up further. We were never completely shielded, but we're opening ourselves up further to the adversary, right? And oftentimes that damage that's going to be done to the people who truly seek to walk with the Lord is going to be done from within. We've seen that in history over and over and over again, as people who claim to be Christians then do not so Christian things. So this concept that's being put forth here is that choose this day whom you shall serve. Whether it's the gods of your fathers over in Ur, right? And this is a quote out of Joshua, the book of Joshua, chapter 24. The little snippet everybody wants, and if you know me well, you know that I don't like snippets, right? Is, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, right? But you better look at the beginning of those statements. There's 3 things that are talked to there. Joshua is calling the people together. They have conquered the land. For the most part, they're waiting for the Lord to continue to push out the people as they multiply so that they will have people to occupy the land. And that's what they're waiting for. And yet the people are starting to stray already. Not stray physically, not geographically, but they're straying from the Lord. And they're starting to do the things that the world would have them do. Asherah poles and all the other stuff that comes with it. So he calls them together and he sets before them and he says, okay, choose this day. Who are you going to serve? And he gives them basically 4 options. The gods of your fathers from the time of Abraham in the land of Ur, the gods of the Mesopotamians, the gods of Egypt across the river, right? And the gods of Mesopotamia were Gnostic type gods. The gods of Egypt were naturalistic type gods, all associated with animals, and a smattering of hedonism in that, or the gods of the people in whose land you now are at, the Canaanites, which were absolutely hedonistic. Choose this day which of these 3 groups that you're going to do, or you can serve God, but you can't mix God with these other 3 groups. Okay? Choose this day whom you shall serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That is what is being spoken to here. All right. Let's see. So, from the Temple Mount, you have people moving out from Jerusalem back out into the rural communities where the pious people were. And the Seleucids and the people who are supporting the Seleucids are following right along behind, looking to force these people to capitulate and to do that which they're supposed to do. You're going to have this Maccabean revolt that starts out in a city that, trying to think of the name of the city. drew a blank on it. Let me see if it's here someplace. Nope. Yes. So and again, Maccabee means hammer. Okay, so those are people of the hammer. Okay, not a Jewish tribe. So the way this works is that the priesthood, those that are seeking to serve the Lord, flee Jerusalem. And one of the priests who had been serving on the temple flees to his hometown. And in that hometown, the Seleucids show up and they say, okay, you're the leader because you're the most senior person and you've been up on the temple. It is on you to stand before the people, to eat the pork, and to bow down to this statue of Zeus that we have erected in the square. And he says, not doing it. And this guy who's like elderly, and again, this was the father to Judas Maccabee, was a priest on the temple, a Levite. Right? This is why the Hasmoneans can seek to rule and establish themselves. They're going to establish themselves wrongly as high priests eventually as well. So what ends up happening is that this other guy who's like 80 some odd years old, he is like, oh, what are you guys squabbling about? Here, I'll eat the darn pork. And the father of Judas Maccabee takes the sword from the sheath of the captain of the guard that's there and runs through the captain and runs through this old man, right? Because not going to allow that to happen in front of him. Because as the people get misled, then everybody follows after those things. And this starts the Maccabean revolt. His son Judah is the general that is going to be in charge of it. And initially they start with farm implements. They had nothing.
Like our American Revolution.
Yep. And so there's much in the American Revolution that points back and speaks to the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucids. All right. What's that? Thank you. Mattathias was the father's name. Thank you. What's that? Yeah, thank you. Yes, that's correct. So Modim is the town, and it is north of Jerusalem, in the mountains that eventually are going to include the area of the Samaritans, Mount Gerizim, and Mount Ebal, right? But it's kind of at the bottom end of that. So this starts the Maccabean revolt, and what ends up happening is that Mattathias says, okay, anybody who is going to not follow after the Seleucids, come join us, and we're going to flee to the wilderness, right? And so people do. And initially, there are just these communities of people that have literally taken themselves out of the little towns that were the rural farming communities in order to seek shelter against the Seleucids. And the Seleucids figure out really quickly, well, all we have to do is show up on a Friday, hang out, and then at the beginning of Saturday morning on the Shabbat, we'll just walk through the camp, and these stupid people aren't going to lift a hand to protect themselves. And they literally went through and killed babies and people and animals, right? And the response from the Seleucids from the Maccabeans is to say, okay, we're not going to pick a fight on the Sabbath, but if they come to our areas, we will defend ourselves. Remember, it would have been working on the Sabbath to be fighting. And so they're not going to pick the fight, but life always supersedes any of the other laws. And to save your life, to save the life of your people, if they're going to pick a fight with you, then it's reasonable to fight against them. So they start out with just farm implements, and they keep using guerrilla warfare tactics, keep cutting down the Seleucids, and the Seleucids keep pouring more and more troops into the area. You have this question as to whether or not Antiochus IV Epiphanes is the Antichrist. Remember, Yeshua himself points to the desolation and the sacrilation of the temple, right? And points to this time frame specifically, and says that it is coming again, and that you better hope that that when it occurs, that it's not on the Sabbath, so that you can travel, and it's not in the winter. And we have in the time of Emperor Hadrian, we have the Bar Kokhba revolt. There were several different revolts. 70 AD, you have one that's put down, and the temple is dismantled in order to get to the gold that had melted and run between the cracks. And you have Simon Bar Kokhba, who, and that was his original name, which means grandfather, but they rename him Kokhba, which means Eastern Star, or means rising star, because there were groups of the Jews who wanted to make him to be the Messiah. Because again, they were still looking for that conquering king Messiah as opposed to the suffering servant. The conquering king comes in the second coming, but in the first coming, it's the suffering servant. Okay, so Simon Bar Kokhba is the guy who's going to lead the revolt. They successfully push out the Romans temporarily, and of course the Romans come back with a vengeance and kill people. Hadrian also sets up an image of himself in the Holy of Holies, and also sacrifices pigs and strews pigs' guts and pig blood all over the place in order to desecrate the temple. And so there's some questions about whether the Bar Kokhba revolt was the second occurrence. And remember that it's not just first and second, but that we can have multiple smaller prophecy fulfillments before we get the final full fulfillment, right? And we know that the final one will be the second coming of Christ. So the temple gets sacrificed in the not sacrificed. The temple gets the pig's blood and the entrails, and the holy place being set up with the statue of Zeus in the time of the Maccabean revolt on the 25th of Kislev, right, which is the beginning of Hanukkah. And it's 3 years later that on the 25th of Kislev they have retaken Jerusalem, and they have set about to clean the temple. They literally had to take the stones of the altar of God out in the courtyard, and remember, those are stones that are not hewn. No tool could have worked on them. And what do you do with that which has been in service to God, even if it has had pig's blood on it that you can't clean, right? You're not going to be able to know definitively that you got it off. Well, they didn't know what to do with it. They can't destroy it. They can't take it like the vessels in the holy place and refine them and remake them via fire to purify them. They couldn't do that. And so what they ended up doing was burying them on the grounds of the second temple, right, in the area of Solomon's portico. And it's there that Yeshua is standing in December, in the time frame of the winter, when it talks about in John chapter 10 about Yeshua at the time of the Feast of Dedication. That's Hanukkah. Right, he's standing at the temple at the column of portico, and that's what they're looking at, right, and where he's standing before. And they want to know, will you tell us? Remember, the question was Judas the Maccabee the Messiah? People made the claim that he was. Was Bar Kokhba the Messiah? And they're standing there before the temple at the Solomon's portico, right where the stones were buried, and they come to Yeshua and they want to know, are you the Messiah? Just tell us plainly. Of course, he says, well, I have told you, but you're not really willing to listen. So you have these fulfillments. Real quickly, you have these battles that occur. 22,000 soldiers against 6,000 Maccabeans, mostly armed with farming implements. Yet they win over and over and over again. Reinforcements are called. That the word is put out that they're going to sell whoever gets captured, and so all this money pours in order to have the money there to buy the captives, right? They send in 22,000 more battle-hardened troops. The Seleucids, or I'm sorry, the Maccabeans again pray for deliverance, and they sell everything they have, expecting that they're going to get defeated and that they're going to have to buy back their brothers and sisters who have been sold into slavery, right? But in fact, what happens is that they win those battles. It reminds them that God is with them because their cause is just: the freedom to worship, the freedom from oppression, adherence to Torah, desecration of the temple, and the murder of innocents. They remind them, this is all coming from the book of Maccabees, they talk about Sennacherib, where God himself kills 185,000 troops outside of the walls of Jerusalem in a night. They're just here one moment and gone the next. They talk about the 8,000 Jews that went with Alexander the Great, and they went up against the army of 120,000 Galatians and killed them. 8,000 Jews. These are the Jews that went with Alexander the Great. So when you look at how things go, you have for Nicanor, you have greater than 9,000 dead. When Timothy and Baccharides come in, you have greater than 20,000 dead. You have the death of Antiochus Epiphanes, and his son rises to power and continues the war against the Maccabeans. And he sends in his general, Georgios. He had greater than 20,000 dead. They had the attack of the Twin Towers. They had another 22,000 dead. They had Timothy and mercenaries who were there that were sent in with battle elephants and this huge array of cavalry, right? And the Jews had none of this, right? And 20,500 dead and the loss of the 600 cavalry. You had Timothy escaping to the tower, and he blasphemes God, and God is going to take care of him. That's in 2 Maccabees 10. You had Lysias, king's guardian kinsman, 11,000 dead, another 1,600 cavalry gone. Joppa started to drown its Jewish citizens, all right, because the people turn on everyone. Jamnia plans to do the same. You have another 5,000 Arabs, because now they're just bringing in troops from all over the kingdom to try to put down this rebellion, only it ain't working. Another 500 cavalry defeated. And at Shavuot, you have Georgius. Judas loses a number of men, but then they find that when they went to Jamnia to rescue the Jews from there, you had some of his men had taken the idols that were in Jamnia, and they had them in their things. And this is where they lost a significant number of people, but they found the idols had been in their tunics. And then they took a collection to make a 2,000 silver drachma sin offering for the dead, taking account of the fact that they would be resurrected, so that when they were resurrected, they would actually be able to have their sin covered, right? We know that the drachmas aren't going to do it, but Christ does, right? But this is the concept that they saw even then within the Old Testament, because it's there. So Antiochus Eupator, the son of Antiochus Epiphanes, each of them invade, and they come together and they bring 110,000 infantry, 5,300 cavalry, 22 battle elephants, 300 chariots armed with the scathes on the wheels so that they could just run through people and slice them up. Menelaus, the guy who had wanted the temple, joins them. Lysias blames Menelaus for starting all of this. Menelaus is put to death and pushed off a 75-foot high tower into ashes. Judas attacks by night, and 2,000 were killed, and the leading elephants were killed too. Antiochus Eupator has to withdraw due to other rebellions that are now starting up in the rest of his kingdom, and he goes off to try to quell those, and he signs a peace agreement with the Maccabees, which then gives, which basically says, okay, we're done, we're not coming back anymore to do this. All right, the themes that we have within the Maccabean revolt are choose this day whom you shall serve. Again, that's the quote out of Joshua chapter 24. You have the concept that we should be doing what God has commanded, that we should shema by faith with right judgment. Remember, that is specifically what God calls us to do. And the right judgment is how to understand the various instructions he gives us so that we know which one to elevate and which one not to elevate, right? When two of them come into conflict, the question is, how then shall we walk? If it's the Sabbath and the Lord of the universe looks at you and has just created your legs to go back to normal after 35 years and says, get up and pick up your mat and walk, do you do it or do you not do it?
Carry a load on the Sabbath, or
That'll be a violation of the law, right? But you're receiving instructions from God himself, right? So the thing to do is to do that which God has done, because it glorifies God that his legs are healed, right? And that he is now revealing to everybody that the letter of the law, which absolutely positively kills, is not the issue. The issue is hearing God's voice and knowing how to adjust those things and how to walk day to day.
So, did the Pharisees then think that they were God on earth because they were the ones that everybody should respond to?
Well, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, both of them have their issues. Yep. The other one is the world trying to stamp out the ways of God, and again, Antiochus Epiphanes as the type of Christ. So we're going to draw to a close our discussion of the Maccabees. Again, the Maccabeans are the Sadducees. They are going to go on to rule, and the last son, you do have a number of the Maccabees who died. Judas is killed in battle. His brother dies before him, killing an elephant with a spear from underneath. You have the seventh son, whose name was Jason, is going to enter into a treaty with Rome because he does not believe that the Seleucids are not coming back. Right? And remember, that treaty with Rome, like with the Ptolemies, doesn't imply troops coming, but they will eventually. And it's that leads to, in 63 BC, to the downfall of Judah as and Israel as a nation, and the subjugation back under the Romans. Okay, or subjugation under the Romans, not back under the Romans, but under the Romans. And of course, that continues the march of history that we have talked about. All right, so join us today for Shabbat. We're going to be looking at some issues having to do with the second coming of Christ. If you have questions, you can reach me at midrashu.cms. Let's see, where's my little, I don't have my little thing, closing thing, at gmail.com. And so, again, questions or concerns, reach out, and shalom.